As long as I'm President of the United States, Iran will never be allowed to have a nuclear weapon. Good morning. I'm pleased to inform you the American people should be extremely grateful and happy. No Americans were harmed in last night's attack by the Iranian regime. We suffered no casualties. All of our soldiers are safe, and only minimal damage was sustained at our military bases. Our great American forces are prepared for anything. Iran appears to be standing down, which is a good thing for all parties concerned and a very good thing for the world. No American or Iraqi lives were lost because of the precautions taken, the dispersal of forces, and an early warning system that worked very well. I salute the incredible skill and courage of America's men and women in uniform. For far too long, all the way back to 1979 to be exact, nations have tolerated Iran's destructive and destabilizing behavior in the Middle East and beyond. Those days are over. Iran has been the leading sponsor of terrorism, and their pursuit of nuclear weapons threatens the civilized world. We will never let that happen. Last week, we took decisive action to stop a ruthless terrorist from threatening American lives. At my direction, the United States military eliminated the world's top terrorist, Qassem Soleimani. As the head of the Quds Force, Soleimani was personally responsible for some of the absolutely worst atrocities. He trained terrorist armies, including Hezbollah, launching terrorist strikes against civilian targets. He fueled bloody civil wars all across the region. He viciously wounded and murdered thousands of U.S. troops, including the planting of roadside bombs that maim and dismember. Directed the recent attacks on U.S. personnel in Iraq that badly wounded 4 service members and killed 1 American, and he orchestrated the violent assault on the U.S. Embassy in Baghdad. In recent days, he was planning new attacks on American targets, but we stopped him. Soleimani's hands were drenched in both American and Iranian blood. He should have been terminated long ago. By removing Soleimani, we have sent a powerful message to terrorists. If you value your own life, you will not threaten the lives of our people. As we continue to evaluate options in response to Iranian aggression, the United States will immediately impose additional punishing economic sanctions on the Iranian regime. These powerful sanctions will remain until Iran changes its behavior. In recent months alone, Iran has seized ships in international waters, fired an unprovoked strike on Saudi Arabia, and shot down 2 U.S. drones. Iran's hostilities substantially increased after the foolish Iran nuclear deal was signed in 2013, and they were given $150 billion, not to mention $1.8 billion in cash. Instead of saying thank you to the United States, they chanted death to America. In fact, they chanted death to America the day the agreement was signed. Then Iran went on a terror spree, funded by the money from the deal, and created hell in Yemen, Syria, Lebanon, Afghanistan, and Iraq. The missiles fired last night at us and our allies were paid for with the funds made available by the last administration. The regime also greatly tightened the reins on their own country, ran a clear and quick path to nuclear breakout. Iran must abandon even recently killing 1,500 people at the many protests, abandon its nuclear ambitions and end its support for terrorism that are taking place all throughout Iran. The time has come for the United Kingdom, Germany, France, Russia, and China. Effective JCPOA expires shortly anyway and gives a right to recognize this reality. They must now break away from the remnants of the Iran deal, or JCPOA. And we must all work together toward making a deal with Iran that makes the world a safer and more peaceful place. We must also make a deal that allows Iran to thrive and prosper and take advantage of its enormous untapped potential. Iran can be a great country. Peace and stability cannot prevail in the Middle East as long as Iran continues to foment violence, unrest, hatred, and war. The civilized world must send a clear and unified message to the Iranian regime. Your campaign of terror, murder, mayhem will not be tolerated any longer. It will not be allowed to go forward. Today, I am going to ask NATO to become much more involved in the Middle East process. Over the last 3 years, under my leadership, our economy is stronger than ever before, and America has achieved energy independence. These historic accomplishments change our strategic priorities. These are accomplishments that nobody thought were possible. And options in the Middle East became available. We are now the #1 producer of oil and natural gas anywhere in the world. We are independent, and we do not need Middle East oil. The American military has been completely rebuilt under my administration at a cost of $2.5 trillion. U.S. armed forces are stronger than ever before. Our missiles are big, powerful, accurate, lethal, and fast. Under construction are many hypersonic missiles. The fact that we have this great military and equipment, however, does not mean we have to use it. We do not want to use it. American strength, both military and economic, is the best deterrent. 3 months ago, after destroying 100% of ISIS and its territorial caliphate, we killed the savage leader of ISIS, al-Baghdadi, who was responsible for so much death, including the mass beheadings of Christians, Muslims, and all who stood in his way. He was a monster. Al-Baghdadi was trying again to rebuild the ISIS caliphate and failed. Tens of thousands of ISIS fighters have been killed or captured during my administration. ISIS is a natural enemy of Iran. The destruction of ISIS is good for Iran, and we should work together on this and other shared priorities. Finally, to the people and leaders of Iran, we want you to have a future, and a great future, one that you deserve, one of prosperity at home and harmony with the nations of the world. The United States is ready to embrace peace with all who seek it. I want to thank you, and God bless America. Thank you very much. Thank you. Thank you.
Now, we have just been coming to you live from Washington, D.C., where the President of the United States, Donald Trump, has been addressing the media on his statement on the U.S.'s next reaction to Iran's attacks on 2 military bases. We are now joined by WION correspondent Daniele Pagani, coming to us for more on this. Good evening to you, Daniele. What do we make of Trump's statement?
Not a very fiery statement, I would say. The world was pretty much worried because a direct attack against U.S. bases in Iraq would have maybe triggered a large reaction by the United States of America. I think that at the end of the day, Washington is deciding to wait and watch, which means that they would be good if everything stops now. They didn't suffer any casualty. The Iraqi security forces and the Iraqi people did not suffer any casualty in this last attack that Iran perpetrated against the two military bases where U.S. personnel are now. We have come to know through Trump's speech that there are new sanctions that are being slapped against Iran. We still have to understand precisely what these sanctions are going to hit. To be honest, there is not much left to sanction the American unilateral sanctions that have been imposed in the last 2 years, have been extremely strong and are already crippling the Iranian economy. The good news is that it seems that the United States Army is not thinking about a massive immediate retaliation. Trump did say, though, that they are still evaluating possibilities and military possibilities, but there is no imminent large-scale attack against Iranian positions in Syria or in Iraq or in Iran. And this means that West Asia can, for now, be quiet and remain not worry too much.
Daniele, stay with us. We are now also joined on the line by WION correspondent Jagruti. Dave, live from Washington, D.C. Good evening to you. Thank you for being with us this evening. What are your reactions to that press statement by Trump?
Well, President Trump has just given a statement where he has announced further sanctions on Iran. There was speculation as to whether he would engage in a retaliatory military action, but that has not happened. He has, in fact, announced further sanctions. He talked a lot about the strength of the United States military, saying that our missiles are big, powerful, accurate, lethal and fast. However, he said that we don't need to use our military prowess, and he said we don't want to use our missiles in our military arsenal. That is what the president has just said. He's also urged the European partners who are involved in the Iran deal to pull out and to renegotiate for a better deal. He said under his watch, as President of the United States, Iran will never have a nuclear arsenal, and he will work towards preventing that from happening. He also said that the United States is evaluating its ongoing strategy towards response towards Iran in light of the attacks on Tuesday night. More than a dozen missiles which hit two Iraqi bases which housed US personnel there.
Jagruti, absolutely. Focusing on what you said, he has called on the P5+1 nations, the UK, France, Germany and the like, to withdraw from the JCPOA. What does this mean?
Well, this is something that President Trump has been talking about for a long time. This is nothing new. He himself withdrew the United States from the Iran deal because he thought that it was a bad deal. It was one that was negotiated by his predecessor alongside European partners. And he's been hugely critical of that deal, saying that it gives Iran too much leverage and it's too soft on Iran. So him calling on European allies to pull out, again, is nothing new. He wants to continue. He signaled that he wants to continue negotiating for what he calls a better deal with Iran, and he wants his European allies to work with him. He believes that he's sending out a message that the American response to Iran has been robust and that there is still room for negotiation, although that until now many experts have been saying that actually negotiations with Iran are at an end as a result of the military action, the strikes and counterstrikes that have been happening over the last week or so.
Jagruti, stay with us. I'm going to go back to you, Daniele. Trump made some strong statements on the military prowess and the economic strength of the United States. How do you think Iran will interpret this statement?
It is impossible that Iran will not respond to this kind of statement, but there is a sensation about the thing that Iran also would be good in stopping here the escalation. Today, the Ayatollah, the leader, the Grand Ayatollah Ali Khamenei, made quite a rather fiery speech, saying that the recent attack was a slap in the face of America. He also vaguely said that this might not be enough, but there is nothing signaling that Iran would actually want to escalate. In fact, on the contrary, the foreign minister of Iran said very clearly right after the attack that they are not seeking war. So these are all kind of messages between the lines between these two countries, which says that they do not actually want to escalate this too much. But it remains to be seen on the ground in Iraq how the very many militias will respond. When it comes to economic sanctions, as I said, it is hard to believe that a new wave of sanctions will actually hit Iran harder than how it has been already hit. The Iranian economy is very much suffering. Inflation is very much on double digits, and it is losing at an enormous pace, a very speed pace. And it is impossible for them to do anything about it, because clearly the weaponization of the American economy is working in Iran when it comes to hitting the people, and this is exactly what happens. It is very unlikely that the European remaining countries that signed the nuclear deal during the Obama administration will find now elbow space in order to negotiate a new deal. Clearly, the word negotiation is not a very popular word now when it comes to the relation between Washington and Tehran.
Absolutely, Daniele. Back to you, Jagruti. With what Daniele has said there on Iran favouring the stopping of the escalation, they did mention that this was the weakest option available to them. What do you think they will do in terms of these sanctions that will now be imposed by the United States?
Well, Iran already has crippling sanctions imposed on them, and there is some thought that a lot of the actions that Iran has engaged in has been in response to those sanctions to try to move the United States' position towards them somehow. It's unclear as to what further the United States can really do sanction-wise to hit the Iranian economy that it already hasn't done. It's affected its oil industry, it's affected its shipping, it's affected its banking sector. So in terms of response, the Iranian regime has said that they do not want an escalation to war. However, they are also the Supreme Leader, Ayatollah Khamenei, spoke talking about potentially looking to working further to expel US forces out of the region. And that is something that watchers of the region are looking to see what Iran does next to try to make good on that threat, that promise, however you like to see it, that they want US troops out of the region.
Absolutely. And with this action, the strike on the two bases in Iraq, we were told that in a statement that they did not perhaps think it was enough, and obviously with no casualties, which Trump has pointed out. Would we think that this was the expected reaction from the US basis this?
Yeah. Former Vice Chair of the Joint Chiefs of Staff speaking to CBS News this morning, and he said that the strikes, the weapons used, were so precise and targeted that it was a very clear strike on bases, that they could have inflicted further casualties if they wanted to, but that it was a choice that Iran made not to. And Javad Zarif, the Iranian foreign minister, invoked Article 51 of the UN Charter, saying that it was a proportionate response to the US strike that killed Qassem Soleimani last week. So this is a message. Some argue that it's a domestic message, sending a message internally in Iran that it's a show of strength, that they are not going to, telling the Iranian people that they are not going to let the killing of Qassem Soleimani go unchecked without a response, but that they recognize that escalating tensions in the region is not something that is politically viable for the Iranians. So that is one thought, school of thought, as to what the intention from the Iranian side was on the US. This was just a physical manifestation of the war of words that has been going on between the United States and Iran.
Jagruti, thank you very much for joining us. That is WION's correspondent coming to us live from Washington, D.C. Daniela, stay with us. I just want to go to some of the highlights from Trump's statement.
No Americans were harmed in last night's attack by the Iranian regime. We suffered no casualties. All of our soldiers are safe, and only minimal damage was sustained at our military bases. Our great American forces are prepared for anything. The United States military eliminated the world's top terrorist, Qassem Soleimani. As the head of the Quds Force, Soleimani was personally responsible for some of the absolutely worst atrocities. He trained terrorist armies, including Hezbollah, launching terrorist strikes against civilian targets. He fueled bloody civil wars all across the region. He viciously wounded and murdered thousands of U.S. troops, including the planting of roadside bombs that maim and dismember their victims. Soleimani directed the recent attacks on U.S. personnel in Iraq that badly wounded 4 service members and killed 1 American, and he orchestrated the violent assault on the U.S. Embassy in Baghdad. In recent days, he was planning new attacks on American targets, but we stopped him. Soleimani's hands were drenched in both American and Iranian blood. He should have been terminated long ago. By removing Soleimani, we have sent a powerful message to terrorists. If you value your own life, you will not threaten the lives of our people. As we continue to evaluate options in response to Iranian aggression, the United States will immediately impose additional punishing economic sanctions on the Iranian regime. These powerful sanctions will remain until Iran changes its behavior.
Now, Daniele, that seemed to be a very measured statement. Also, Trump's initial reactions, he didn't shoot off 100 tweets. He said all is good, and then there would be a statement to follow. Would you agree with that?
Definitely, I would agree with that. This was a rather measured statement as far as the word measured is concerned when it comes to President Donald Trump, clearly. But it could have been much, much worse. I think that what prevented a quick escalation, and an escalation that could have spiraled out of control, was the fact that there were no casualties. Americans had enough intelligence to track down the movement of the ballistic missile batteries within Iran in order to understand with sufficient advance that there was an offensive action being taken by the Iranian army, so that prevented the casualties. Also, the entire United States Army deployments all across West Asia were on high alert. So the absence of casualties both on the American side and also on the Iraqi side, remember that the Americans are in Iraq at the invitation of the Prime Minister of Iraq, and they are training the Iraqi army. So if any Iraqi army casualties would have been there, the Americans would have been able and capable to respond. The absence of casualties and the fact that the intelligence was solid enough to prevent those casualties means that Washington is toning down in order to send a veiled message to Tehran that if things stop here, militarily speaking, clearly, there is no need to go further, militarily speaking. Sanctions are another weapon, but it's not war. And when we are talking about vast military action in West Asia, I think that as of now, at least, the worst-case scenario is not anymore on the table. But the American army is still evaluating possible retaliations, but I would say that a massive, major American offensive against the Iranian premises, either inside Iran or outside the country here in the region,